thanks for coming. Those of you here today that I don't know, well, I don't know you because I've never seen you before, so I'm happy to see some new faces. My name is Sarah Ripp. I'm the Outreach Coordinator and Undergrad Advisor for the Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies program. And it's always fun to have new faces come to our lecture series. So as you've noticed, there's some coffee, tea, and snacks in the back, as well as some information about Darrell's book, if you want to grab a handout. So thank you so much for coming, and I will introduce our speaker now. So Darrell Newton is the Associate Professor and Department Chair of the Department of Communication Arts at Salisbury University in Maryland. He's been working in higher education since 1979. He teaches media and cultural studies, film and broadcast writing in international media. After extensive research conducted with the British Broadcasting Corporation, Newton earned his doctorate in communications arts in May 2002 with an emphasis in media and cultural studies, and that was from UW-Madison. And he's just completed a book called Paving the Empire Road, BBC Television in Black Britons for Manchester University Press, and that's what he's going to speak with us today about. So thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
And happy Valentine's Day.
Exactly. I did all that. All of a sudden, I'm very tired, everybody, just from listening to the introduction. Okay, so I wore like this red vest and it's like Valentine's kind of now. All right. I'm glad it's a small group so I can talk to you guys informally about this presentation. The book itself, to say it's a labor of love is a gross understatement. It basically is a spin-off of my dissertation, which of course was led by John Fisk, by Michelle, and also by a couple of folks from Mass Communications, Henry Shaw and Joel and Fair. And years ago, as I was explaining earlier, we were talking in the hallway, I had a chance to go to England in 1993 with a colleague from Whitewater. And she, as a black Briton, worked in the film industry and also on television, and asked me about the possibility of going to a party and meeting with other folks who work in the industry as well. Went to a party, hung out with these folks, got a chance to talk a bit, and then I had a chance to ask the question, hey, what do you guys think about representations of blacks on British television? And all of a sudden the room exploded, and everyone had these very negative comments about the BBC, Channel 5, ITV, and others. And then I said, well, gee, who are your favorite black folks on television? And the Black Britons all named black Americans, like Bill Cosby, Oprah Winfrey, and others. And that in itself was kind of problematic. But at that very moment, I thought, oh, dissertation project. And I wrote my letter shortly after that, which Michelle read, and John and others, and the rest is history. I want to thank LACIS for bringing me up here. Thanks a lot, you folks, for this. I really appreciate it. Sarah, thanks for everything. Since it's a small group, again, you guys get to be informal, I want to talk to you about the introduction of the book. There's about 10 pages of it I wanted to read to you to kind of put things in focus. But I'd rather not do that instead. I'd rather talk much more about just the presentation and about the book itself and what it all means. Now, as far as it's concerned, looks like that. Okay. Copy is floating around someplace, all right? And the idea with the book itself, folks, is that I also did a partial lit review for academic types and sort of impress them. You recognize some of the names here, especially that one, okay? And some other people. With each subject matter that I tried to emphasize in the book, I reached out to a group of different scholars to look at their work and things like that. However, I also tried really hard to not be too academic and too theoretical in my approach. My editor at Manchester discouraged this for fear the book wouldn't sell for about 30 books he says aren't selling these days. I still incorporated some theory enough to make it worthwhile. But I also tried to make it basically a media history piece in the very same way that Michelle does. And consequently, again, touched on some other folks and touched on their work and things like that. And also looked at, oh my God, Foucault, Baudrillard, also played around with some other people like that too. But not quite so much as to scare off the average reader. So, as I move forward with the work itself, I found out a few things that I think I'd like to perhaps emphasize. First of all, British television for a long time has tried to address race in some form or fashion. We're talking about way back in 1948. One of the first times that white Britons saw black folks on television was a result of a TV show called TV Newsreel, or Television Newsreel, on the BBC. And what the BBC would do is simply use newsreels from British Cafe, whom they had a really good working relationship with, and show them on television. in 15-minute long programs. So imagine folks sitting back in their living rooms watching the arrival of the Empire Windrush, which is a boat that came from Jamaica in 1948, carrying 492 West Indian men and 2 women who happened to stow away on the boat. Well, needless to say, they were kind of taken aback by it. Some folks had no problem with it, some had major problems with it. And the program itself was one that I think would be pretty legendary overall. I'll show you some clips in just a couple seconds. And when I think about the Empire Windrush and think about the actual program itself, it's sort of like it was the very first time that the issue of homogenized racial perspectives was disrupted, where people said, wait a second, all of a sudden Britain is not the Britain we used to know and love. There are these folks coming in now. In a small number, but nevertheless upset a lot of people. The Colonial Office wasn't expecting it. The House of Parliament wasn't expecting it. And certain MPs who were very, very conservative, shall we say, had major problems with it. And of course, they made their feelings known. Didn't stop the influx of West Indians, however, because again, black folks have been in England since the 14th century, so there's nothing new. But they happened to come this time in a reasonably large group, and also it was a televised event, so folks got to see it. At the time, there were only 300,000 licenses in England, but that was just enough for folks, of course, to see it. And don't forget, as Michelle knows all too well, there was lots and lots of communal viewing at the time, too. Televisions in bars and pubs, where several folks would sit and watch a TV set, or in a laundromat or something like that. So the audience is probably much, much larger than just 300,000 people. Okay? Yeah. Let me show you guys a clip. Again, the television newsreel program, and the arrival of the Empire Windrush.
Arrival of the children. The Empire Windrush brings to Britain 500 Jamaicans. Many are ex-servicemen who know England. They served their country well. In Jamaica, they couldn't find work. Discouraged but full of hope, they sailed for Britain. Soon into the British Empire, coming to the mother country with good intent. Prodded by public opinion, the Colonial Office gives them a more cordial reception than to the first visit. Many are to be found jobs. Our reporter asks them what they want to do.
I want you to come to England. To seek a job. Now, what sort of job do you want?
Some will go into industry, others intend to rejoin the service.
Now, you're an Air Force, aren't you? Yes. Are you going to make the Air Force game? Yes. You know you'll be accepted? I think so.
Some plan to return to Jamaica when conditions improve.
I'd like to ask you, please, are you a single man?
I am a single man, and only my mother that is depending on me, and I'm also an ex-serviceman.
Ex-service? Are you?
I took a course in Scotland in case making, and I'm desirous of going back here to see if I can further, because I like it very much, and I'm trying to help myself more towards my mom.
Their spokesman sings his thanks to Britain.
Now, may I ask you your name? Lord Kitchener. Lord Kitchener. Now, I'm told that you are really the king of the literature singers. Is that right?
Yes, that's
Now,
true.
you speak for us?
Right now,
Yes.
London is the place for me. London, this lovely city. You can go to France or America, India, Asia, or Australia, but you must come back to London. Well, believe me, I am speaking broad-mindedly. I am glad to know my mother country. I've been traveling the country years ago, but this is the place I wanted to make on London. This is the place for me.
He later actually recorded that on wax, on vinyl. It became a major, major hit all over England and also the West Indies. And in many ways became this kind of like inspirational cry for others to think about coming to England. And the BBC, after that, every single time they talked about West Indians on television, you heard that song playing in the background. In almost every show, so it kind of started driving people crazy after a while, I'm sure. But, excuse me, despite the fact, you guys, they all started out being very warm and welcoming to this small group of individuals coming over. Later that changed because, of course, immigration began to increase and jumped to about 10,000, 15,000 people within 5 years. And this, of course, made the Brits rather concerned. And of course, the obvious things popped up: economic concerns, jobs, housing, and things along those lines. Despite the fact there were no problems finding jobs at that time, because of course England was still in Reconstruction following the war, the Blitzkrieg, and things like that. But nevertheless, the idea of having these interlopers come in, of course, cause major problems. So we started seeing these very problematic sort of circumstances being framed as normative.
In 1954, about 10,000 West Indians came to Britain. In 1955, it is believed another 15,000 will make the long journey. Already their coming has caused a national controversy, but one point must always be borne in mind. Whatever our feelings, we cannot deny them entry, for all are British citizens and, as such, are entitled to the identical rights of any member of the Empire. Now the end of their journey is near. What will they find in the land they regard as an Eldorado? Somerleyton Road houses many of the 3,500 immigrants who have settled in Lambeth. Not exactly the paradise so many expected. At number 49, Mr. and Mrs. Austin live comfortably with their children. They are lucky, for many of their fellow immigrants have been crowded 6 or 7 to a room with a weekly rent of 30 shillings each. The Labour Exchange usually finds jobs for the immigrants within a few days, if they're employable. Some, it must be remembered, have never tackled any of the jobs that are vacant. But for many, there will be wage packets of £9 or £10 a week, and contrary to reports, the influx of West Indians does not cause unemployment amongst the white workers. There is work for all, coloured and white. At a nursery in Cold Harbour Lane, their children are cared for whilst the parents are at work. The children are often the main reason for the West Indians' emigration. My child, he says, must have a better education than me. It is a policy that can only bring good to the British colonies. A plea for controlled immigration was taken to the Colonial Office by Lambeth's Mayor, Councillor White. There is an acute housing problem in the borough. 10,000 are on the waiting list, and naturally, a further Jamaican influx is not favoured. When interviewed by our reporter, the Mayor put forward an answer to the problem.
First and foremost, of course, is the long-term policy that ultimately will have to be adopted. And that is the development of the West Indies themselves, because that is the only answer to this particular problem.
The market in Brixton is for them a happier place than a market in the tourist's paradise they have left. Much of the outcry against the immigrants arises from the colour bar, which legally does not exist in Britain. Nevertheless, we accept with little criticism the fact that thousands of white foreigners, including 15,000 former enemies, have made their homes in this country. Bill Strachan, in the centre, came from Jamaica during the war. He became an officer in the Royal Air Force and flew as a bomber pilot. Bill, who now works in a council office, sums up the feelings of West Indians who wish to settle in Britain.
From the West Indies here have no enmity towards any British people, and in fact will be a strength to them and are extremely ambitious. I can assure trade unionists that there will be no problem with them undercutting trade unionists, and I can assure them that they will help in the cultural life in this country, and every attempt on their part is at social integration and being completely happy and cooperative with the British people. We don't want any special privileges or anything more than any other British worker has in this country.
A pathetic sight. Yet they ask no pity from us, only that we respect that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Does the answer to these Britishers' problems lie in Britain or in the West Indies? And yet perhaps, if we dig deep enough, we may find the solution hidden within the conscience of us all.
Gee, can you say patronizing, boys and girls? No?
Was that made in the 50s?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And by the way, everyone, please forgive the superimpositions across some of the clips I've shown here, but these folks are expensive. They had to buy some of the stills for the book. Believe me, to buy film is even worse. Now, some of you guys also know, you folks in comm arts especially, along came, of course, ITV a few years later, ITV being the first commercial network in the UK, because the BBC, of course, is commercial free. And they were not to be outdone when it came to examining the problematic circumstances, of course, of the West Indian immigration system.
People in trouble. During the post-war years, television began to develop its various popular genres, and it also began to construct blacks as a social problem, whether in the development of studio magazine discussion programs, light entertainment, the crime series, or the early plays for today. How were blacks typically implicated in these new developing genres?
You, sir, I imagine, this Windrush day.
The visual threat blacks posed couldn't be brought closer to home than through the prospect of miscegenation.
Well, I've been there and seen them in their own home surroundings. And as a parliamentary candidate, I've been in a good many working class houses, where there have been, yes indeed, where there have been many mixed marriages where I've seen the children. And my view is this, that no first-class nation can afford to produce a race of mongrels.
You know, when I first saw that clip, I thought that guy was an actor that was portraying some kind of really right-wing racist British guy. This guy is actually W.A. McMillan. He's written a series of books. I purchased several when I was doing the research for my book that had a very strong anti-immigration stance, but not against India quite so much, just against the West Indies. Go figure, right? Okay. Some years later, however, along came a documentary piece that's considered, just legendary in the UK, called The Colony. The Colony was made by the BBC, I believe, in 1964. And what they did is they actually took the opportunity to talk with West Indians who had lived there for a period of time, what they thought about life in England as an immigrant. And this time around, there's no narration. There's no voiceover. It's just the actual words of the individuals themselves. Why don't you guys take a look at this?
But after advancing at this age and beginning to read books and things like that, finding out for myself that it isn't altogether the way how I thought it was. It appears now to me as if everybody has got to struggle through life so as to make a grade, if you didn't intend making a grade at all. I would like to see if I can go home back someday, even better off than how I did come in the country. And the only way of doing that or achieving the goal in that respect is to see if I can get myself a job and try to keep the job the best possible way. Ignore any form of ignorance that might be an embarrassment to me and things like that. Because it is ordinarily said, if a man wants good, his nose has got to run.
I thought that, well, I was going to travel and England would be a beautiful place. But when we got on the train and we saw some of the smoky buildings, as if they were frowning, and the sun wasn't very bright. It was sort of hazy. I thought I wouldn't be able to stay in England. And I wanted to cry, but I was ashamed to do so. And lots of other girls, were horrified. One girl held on to me, and as we got on the train, and we had to pass through one or two tunnels, and this woman held on, she grasped me and said she doesn't want to go into such a dark place anymore, and we sort of laughed. Coming through the meadows and so on, my heart began to feel good, seeing all the beautiful flowers, but still I didn't feel too comfortable. Well, I thought it was because I was tired and so on. But coming into Birmingham, I can't quite remember what happened. But as I came in and saw where I had to live, my heart sank. Most of the time I cried.
Pretty heart-wrenching stuff. Now again, I examined each of these motion pictures, or each of these TV shows, I should say, within the first chapter, the second chapter, and third chapter. And the colony, of course, being something very important. Now also in the first chapter, I started taking a look at the influence of radio on television, of course, which is well known throughout the world for that matter. But in this case, BBC Radio began to really do the very first kind of flirtations with the idea of multiculturalism by bringing people like Kenneth Beck and also Ernie Marston to do production of shows. And the shows themselves were directed toward West Indian audiences, broadcast live from London, which was a wonderful thing, except I can't find hardly any actual recordings because they wouldn't be live, as Michelle knows. So that's kind of a difficult process. Excuse me. But the thing was, in many cases, Ernie Marston was given like almost complete autonomy, just given carte blanche to run her shows the way she wanted, because she worked for a fellow named Cecil Gibbon, who was a very well-known producer of the BBC. And under his tutelage, she began to kind of groom her for other things, so she began to do a lot of work in radio. And one of the main things she also did was to work very closely with various West Indian groups around the country, bring them on the air to talk about their experiences, and talk about the war effort. And especially during the war, she prided herself in bringing soldiers on and flyers and such to talk about their experiences, and also to read letters back home to loved ones who may be listening in. And this created other programs that came later, like Caribbean Voices and West Indian Diary and We See Britain and things like that, each one featuring the West Indian perspective on life in the country. Now, of course, the BBC had the last word, and the Blue Pencil was always present, but in many cases, again, they trusted Una Marston to do her own thing. So she became one of the most powerful women in radio, way, way back, just about the time that TV was something that was considered. Here I kind of lay out some of the things that are specific years that give a chronology of how things have progressed for the most part. And then move forward to the next chapter, which I start looking very closely at the whole entire notion of radio and the radio programs I just mentioned a few moments ago, again, run by Una Marston and others. However, as suggested a few moments ago, it was never more important than during the war as a means of trying to promote assistance from the colonials, quote unquote, as they were called, in the war effort. And despite the fact that at one time England had a very mixed opinion about bringing colonials or others into the country, when the war happened, they were there trying to recruit as much as possible to help, of course, in the fight. There was a short film that was made in conjunction with the Ministry of Information of the MOI and also the BBC and British Cathay, in which they got together a bunch of West Indians, especially Larry Constantine, who was a cricketer, who went on to become like a statesman within the British government. And they got these folks together to kind of offer a sort of rally around the flag sort of perspective for audiences to see. And it was very successful.
Every one of these people gathered together in this studio is a West Indian. Everyone has come across 4,000 miles of ocean from that great bay in the Atlantic which lies between North and South America, the Caribbean Sea. They have come from the long chain of islands which stretches from the Bahamas in the north right round to Trinidad. They call themselves West Indians, but they are of a dozen different races, descendants of the British and French and Spanish adventurers who opened up the New World, of the African slaves who were brought across to work on the sugar plantations, of Chinese shopkeepers, of Hindus and Muslims from India. Today, West Indians have common citizenship and common cause with us, and they have come over to help us. Each week, some of them broadcast messages home to their families in the West Indies, but this evening they are broadcasting to Britain.
We're ready for you, Malcolm.
Thank you, Tommy.
Hello everybody, this is Larry Constantine. I'd like to say a few words about the many hundreds of West Indians who have come over here to help on the factory front.
The film goes on from there. I think it's so fascinating, you guys, how during the war, the West Indies was so deracialized. and made it to a place where everyone kind of came from. After the war, that changed radically. After the war, cultural differences were underscored more often than not. It's something I talk about a lot in chapter 2. Again, television programming was just starting to really find itself in England, and there were lots of producers, especially Grace Wyndham Goldie, who wanted to start looking at race in a very scientific way, which of course a lot of audiences didn't like very much. So they started doing docudramas and things like that, which Grace Wyndham Goldie didn't like very much. And finally they started working on certain documentaries that of course would address what the West Indian influx really meant to the average Briton, quote unquote. And again, cultural differences were underscored more often than not.
Manners are different too. In Jamaica, this is the normal way to attract the attention of the man behind the bar. In English pubs, they don't approve of it. To the coloured man, it sometimes seems that his most innocent actions provoke an ungracious disapproval. Suspicion hardens on both sides.
Hello, Cousin Alvin. I hope you're well as I am too. Things still bad enough in Jamaica and wants to tell you to leaving this place. I'm coming soon to London, and I hope you're not too grand to know your cousin Cleve when he gets off that boat.
My husband, him sent for me, and now he's not here to meet me. I got luggage, I got baby, I got plenty things, and him not giving me any help.
But you haven't completed your journey yet. You have to take the train to Waterloo Station.
I don't want to go to Waterloo. I want to go to London Station.
Waterloo is in London. I expect you'll go meet me there.
Mister, how can I find this place?
It's in London. Is a friend you going to?
This is my cousin. We told him to come meet me, but we can't see him at all.
We'll probably meet you at Waterloo.
How am I going to get there?
You go on that train over there. Have you a ticket?
No, sir, I got no ticket.
And you buy a ticket from that booth over there. Understand?